The cargo ship Gentle Current drifted through the void like a wounded animal, its hull scarred by plasma burns and micrometeorite impacts. Captain Zara pressed her four-fingered hand against the viewport, watching the stars whirl slowly past as the ship's damaged gyroscopes struggled to maintain orientation. The Villani were a peaceful species. Their elongated limbs and translucent skin evolved for their homeworld's gentle gravity and filtered sunlight. They had never been warriors, never needed to be. Until now. Captain, the primary fusion reactor is failing, reported Engineer Kes from his station, his melodic voice carrying the tremor that all Villani developed when stressed. We have perhaps 6 standard hours before complete shutdown. Zara nodded, her large, luminous eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting that had become their constant companion for the past 3 days. The Gentle Current wasn't a military vessel. It was designed to carry agricultural supplies between the outer colonies. Its cargo holds filled with seeds, fertilizers, and farming equipment that would never reach their destination. The colonies they were meant to supply were gone now, reduced to radioactive ash by the hegemony's planet crackers. The hegemony. Even thinking the name made Zara's delicate features contort with an expression her species rarely displayed: hatred. The militant alliance of a dozen aggressive species had swept through the outer rim like a plague, consuming everything in their path. They took what they wanted and destroyed the rest, leaving nothing but debris fields and silent worlds in their wake. Any word from the fleet? Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. Communications Officer Vin shook his head, his bioluminescent patches flickering with distress patterns. Nothing, Captain. The last transmission was from Admiral Korvac's flagship, and that was 18 hours ago. Static after that. 18 hours. Zara calculated the time in her head. The main Villani defensive fleet had engaged the hegemony forces at the Kepler Nexus, a strategic jump point that controlled access to 3 major trade routes. If the fleet had fallen, she pushed the thought away. Some thoughts were too terrible to complete. The bridge crew worked in tense silence, their movements careful and precise despite the fear that permeated the recycled air. There were 47 souls aboard the Gentle Current, mostly civilians who had been evacuated from the outer colonies before the hegemony arrived. Families, researchers, teachers, people who had never imagined they would die in the cold vacuum of space, hunted like prey animals. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, Van announced suddenly, his voice pitched higher with alarm. Large mass, artificial signature. It's big, Captain. Zara felt her heart sink. The Villani had twin cardiovascular systems, an evolutionary quirk that served them well in their homeworld's variable atmospheric pressure. Right now, both hearts seemed to skip beats in perfect synchronization. Hegemony? Unknown. The signature is unlike anything in our database. It's moving fast, very fast. Intercept course. Through the viewport, Zara could see nothing but stars and the distant glow of a nebula. Space was vast and empty, which made it all the more terrifying when something large and hostile came hunting. The hegemony fleet was composed primarily of Kratari dreadnoughts, massive, wedge-shaped vessels bristling with weapons and armored with ablative plates that could shrug off most conventional weapons. The Villani had tried to fight them with their elegant, crystal-hulled cruisers, designed for exploration and trade rather than war. It had been like watching butterflies attack dragons. Time to intercept? Zara asked. 14 minutes at current velocity. Captain, the contact is decelerating. It knows we're here. Of course it did. The Gentle Current wasn't built for stealth, and her damaged systems were probably broadcasting their location across multiple electromagnetic spectrums. Zara made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. All stop. Power down everything except life support and passive sensors. If they want us, make them work for it. The ship fell silent except for the gentle hum of the life support systems and the occasional creak of stressed metal. In the darkness, the crew waited. Some prayed to the ancient Villani spirits of wind and water. Others simply held hands with their loved ones, taking comfort in the warmth of living touch. The mysterious contact grew larger on their passive sensors, its mass readings climbing to impossible numbers. This wasn't a Kratari dreadnought. This was something else entirely, something that made even the hegemony's largest ships look small by comparison. "Captain," Vin whispered, his voice barely audible. Visual contact. Zara looked up at the main screen, and her breath caught in her throat. The ship that materialized out of the darkness was like nothing she had ever seen. It was massive beyond comprehension, easily 10 times the length of the largest Krotari vessel. But it wasn't the size that made her stare in wonder, it was the design. Where hegemony ships were brutal and angular, this vessel flowed like liquid metal. Its hull was a deep, matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, broken only by lines of soft blue illumination that traced geometric patterns across its surface. It moved with impossible grace for something so large, as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions to its builders. "No match in any database," Vin reported, his professional training overriding his amazement. "The design principles are completely unknown. Energy signatures are strange, like nothing we've encountered before." The alien ship came to a relative stop, perhaps 1,000 kilometers away, close enough that its bulk filled a significant portion of space visible through the viewport. For several minutes, nothing happened. The two ships hung in space like dancers frozen in time, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Then, the communications board lit up with an incoming transmission. Not the harsh, demanding signal of the hegemony, but something softer, almost musical. Vin's hands danced over his controls, trying to isolate the signal and decode its meaning. It's in our language, Captain. Perfect grammatical structure, no accent or translation errors. They're asking permission to come aboard." Zara blinked, her large eyes widening further. In over a decade of space travel, she had never encountered another species that bothered to ask permission for anything. The hegemony took what they wanted. The other major powers demanded compliance. But this unknown ship was requesting permission like civilized beings. "Response?" Vin asked. Zara studied the massive vessel on her screen. She had two choices: grant permission to unknown aliens who might be hostile, or refuse, and probably die anyway when her reactor failed in a few hours. When put like that, the decision was easy. Tell them yes. Docking Bay 3. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The crew watched their sensors as a small craft detached from the massive ship, moving toward them with the same fluid grace as its parent vessel. The shuttle, if it could be called that, was perhaps twice the size of their own emergency pods, its design echoing the flowing lines of a larger ship. It docked with barely a whisper of contact, the mechanical systems interfacing perfectly despite the complete difference in technological approaches. Zara made her way to Docking Bay 3, accompanied by Security Chief Yan and Engineer Kess. She had no idea what to expect, but the three of them represented the closest thing the Gentle Current had to a diplomatic welcoming committee. The airlock cycled, and Zara held her breath. The door opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and through the threshold stepped beings unlike any she had ever encountered. They were tall, perhaps 2 meters in height, with a generally humanoid structure, but proportions that spoke of evolution on a different world under different conditions. Their skin was a warm brown color with subtle variations in tone, and they moved with a controlled strength that reminded Zara of predators from her homeworld. But it was their faces that captivated her, mobile features capable of expressing a range of emotions, topped by hair that grew in various colors and styles. The leader stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was deeper than any Villani's but carried warmth and something that sounded almost like kindness. "Captain Zara of the vessel Gentle Current, I am Commander Marcus Chun of the Terran ship Phantom Strike. We received your distress beacon and came to assist." Zara felt her knees go weak with relief. Assistance? When was the last time anyone had offered assistance rather than demands or threats? She managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Commander Chun, we are grateful for your response. But I must warn you, there are hegemony forces in this sector. Your ship, no matter how impressive, cannot stand against their entire fleet." Marcus Chun smiled, an expression that transformed his already pleasant features into something genuinely reassuring. "Captain, with respect, you don't know what our ship can do. We're here to help, and we don't abandon people who need assistance. That's not the human way." Human. Zara filed the species name away for later consideration. Right now, all that mattered was the impossible hope blooming in her chest. She had prayed to the spirits for salvation, never expecting it to come in the form of unknown aliens in a ship that looked like it belonged in legends rather than reality. "What do you need?" Marcus asked, his tone businesslike but not cold. Behind him, two other humans worked with portable equipment, their movements efficient and purposeful. "Our reactor is failing. We have perhaps 5 hours before complete power loss, and our navigation systems were damaged in the attack. We're lost, Commander. We don't even know where we are." "Easily fixed," Marcus replied, as if massive reactor failures were routine maintenance issues. "My engineers can stabilize your fusion plant, and our navigation computers have already calculated your position. You're about 40 light years from the nearest safe port, a place called Haven Station." 40 light years. With their damaged systems, that journey would take weeks, far longer than their failing reactor could sustain. Zara's brief hope began to fade, but Marcus seemed to read her expression. "Don't worry, Captain. We'll escort you to safety. Our ship can generate a subspace tunnel that will cut the journey time to a few hours rather than weeks." Subspace tunnel. Zara had heard theoretical discussions of such technology, but no species had ever successfully implemented it on any practical scale. The power requirements alone would be staggering, requiring the output of multiple fusion plants or something else entirely. As if reading her thoughts, one of the humans, a woman with short red hair and intricate mechanical devices covering her arms, spoke up. "Our power source is a bit different from yours, Captain. We should have no trouble maintaining a stable tunnel for the duration of the journey." Engineer Kess stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "What type of power generation do you use? Fusion? Antimatter? Something more exotic?" The red-haired woman exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded slightly. "Controlled singularity manipulation," she said simply. "We use artificial black holes as power sources." The silence that followed was deafening. Kess's translator implant must have malfunctioned, because there was no way she had just said what Zara thought she said. Controlling black holes was the stuff of theoretical physics, discussed in universities and research stations as an impossibility that might perhaps be achieved by species millions of years more advanced than anyone currently active in the galaxy. "I realize that sounds impossible," Marcus said gently. "A lot of what humans can do sounds impossible until you see in action. The important thing is that we can get you to safety. Your people don't deserve to die out here in the dark. Your people." The simple phrase carried more weight than Marcus probably realized. For the past weeks, the Villani had felt abandoned by the galaxy, left to face the hegemony alone while other species either fled or tried to negotiate separate peace treaties. But here was someone, these humans, who saw them as people worth saving rather than obstacles to avoid. "There's something else," Zara said hesitantly. "The hegemony destroyed our colonies, murdered millions of our people. Even if you can save this ship, there may be nowhere left to go. Our homeworld fell silent 3 days ago." Marcus's expression hardened, and, for a moment, Zara caught a glimpse of something dangerous lurking behind his kind eyes. "Captain, the hegemony has been making a lot of noise in this part of the galaxy, killing civilians, destroying peaceful worlds. That stops now. Commander, you cannot possibly challenge the entire hegemony fleet. They have hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel. No single vessel, no matter how advanced " "Captain," Marcus interrupted gently. "You're thinking in terms of conventional warfare. We're not conventional." He paused, considering his words carefully. "Humans have been fighting wars for longer than most species have existed. We've gotten very, very good at it. The hegemony thinks they're apex predators. They're about to learn what real predators look like." As if summoned by his words, the ship's communications system crackled to life. Ven's voice echoed through the docking bay, tight with panic. "Captain, multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Hegemony fleet, at least 20 vessels. They found us." Through the docking bay's transparent aluminum windows, Zara could see the familiar angular shapes materializing in the distance, their weapon ports already glowing with the promise of death. The Kratari dreadnoughts moved in precise formation, accompanied by smaller cruisers and what looked like a command ship of unusual design. Marcus touched a device on his wrist, speaking in rapid, clipped tones. "Strike Command, this is Chun. We have civilians to protect, and hostiles inbound. Authorization to engage? A voice responded from the device, crisp and professional. Authorization granted, Commander. Show them what happens when they threaten innocence. Marcus turned to Zara, and his smile was no longer gentle. It was the expression of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. Captain, I suggest you get your people to safe positions. This might get a little rough. Captain Zara had barely made it back to the bridge when the universe exploded into violence around them. Through the main viewport, she watched the hegemony fleet spread into attack formation, their weapons charging with the malevolent glow that had become the harbinger of death for so many worlds. 20 ships against one. No matter how advanced the human vessel might be. The mathematics of warfare were simple and brutal. Captain, the human ship is moving, reported Van, his voice cracking with tension. It's positioning itself between us and the hegemony fleet. The massive bulk of the Phantom Strike slid through space with impossible grace, its dark hull seeming to drink in the light from the nearby stars. From the General Current's position, Zara could see the human vessel in profile, and she was struck again by how different it looked from any military ship she had ever encountered. There were no obvious weapon ports, no missile bays, no visible shield generators. Just that flowing organic design that seemed more grown than built. Are they insane? Security Chief Jan muttered, his own fear bleeding through his professional composure. 1 ship against 20? They're committing suicide. But even as he spoke, something was happening to the human ship. The soft blue lines that traced across its hull began to pulse with increasing intensity, and the space around it started to change. It was subtle at first, like heat shimmer on a hot day, but gradually became more pronounced. The very fabric of space-time seemed to ripple outward from the Phantom Strike in concentric waves. Energy readings are off the scale, Engineer Kess reported, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. Whatever they're doing, it's drawing power equivalent to a small star. The hegemony fleet had noticed the spatial distortions as well. The lead dreadnought, a massive Kratari vessel bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo launchers, opened fire without warning. Brilliant lances of superheated gas streaked across space toward the human ship, followed by a spread of antimatter warheads that could vaporize a city. The weapon struck and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, not even destroyed. They simply ceased to exist the moment they touched the rippling space around the Phantom Strike. The antimatter warheads, carrying enough destructive force to crack a planet's crust, disappeared without so much as a flash of light. Impossible, Jan whispered. You can't just make energy disappear. It violates the fundamental laws of physics. But the humans were apparently unconcerned with what was possible or impossible. The Phantom Strike continued its advance toward the hegemony fleet, and now Zara could see weapons emerging from its hull. Not the crude projectile launchers or energy beams that dominated galactic warfare, but something far more elegant and terrifying. Sections of the ship's hull flowed like liquid, revealing crystalline structures that hummed with barely contained power. From these emerged what looked like metal spears, each one perhaps 50 meters long and glowing with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. They hung in space around the human ship like a cloud of deadly insects, motionless despite the lack of any visible propulsion. Those aren't missiles, Kess said, studying his sensor readings with the fascination of a scientist observing a completely new phenomenon. I don't know what they are. The sensor returns make no sense. They register as both matter and energy simultaneously. The hegemony fleet, faced with technology they didn't understand, responded in the only way they knew how. All 20 ships opened fire simultaneously, filling the space between the fleets with enough destructive energy to sterilize a solar system. Plasma bolts, particle beams, graviton torpedoes, and exotic matter cannons all converged on the single human vessel. None of them reached their target. The spatial distortions around the Phantom Strike had intensified, creating what appeared to be a barrier of folded space-time itself. The hegemony weapons struck the barrier and were instantly translated elsewhere, their energy dispersed harmlessly into parallel dimensions or redirected into the empty void between stars. Then, the humans struck back. The glowing spears began to move, not with the crude thrust of conventional missiles, but with the fluid grace of living things. They accelerated to impossible velocities in seconds, weaving through space in patterns that seemed to mock the laws of inertia and conservation of momentum. Some split into multiple projectiles mid-flight, others merged together into larger formations, all while maintaining their impossible speed and maneuverability. The first spear reached the lead Krotari dreadnought and passed through its shields as if they didn't exist. The massive vessel, armored with ablative plates that could withstand direct hits from fusion bombs, was pierced cleanly from bow to stern. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the dreadnought simply unraveled. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't structural collapse. The ship came apart at the molecular level, its constituent atoms separating as if the forces that held them together had simply been switched off. In seconds, a vessel that had carried 3,000 crew members was reduced to an expanding cloud of component elements. Molecular dissolution. Kess breathed, his scientific mind trying to process what he was witnessing. They're not destroying the ships, they're breaking the atomic bonds that hold matter together. The hegemony fleet tried to scatter, but the human weapons followed them with predatory patience. One by one, the alien vessels were touched by the glowing spears and dissolved into cosmic dust. Cruisers, destroyers, support vessels. None of them could escape or defend against weapons that treated conventional defenses as mere inconveniences. Within minutes, 19 of the 20 hegemony ships were gone, their crews never even understanding what had killed them. Only the command vessel remained, a massive construct of unknown design that seemed different from the Krotari dreadnoughts. This ship had better shields, more sophisticated defenses, and its hull gleamed with the telltale shimmer of exotic matter armor. It also had a crew that was apparently smarter than their compatriots. Incoming transmission from the surviving vessel. Vin reported, his voice still shaky from what they had all witnessed. They're requesting terms for surrender. Surrender. Zara felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, though whether it was born of relief or hysteria, she couldn't say. The mighty hegemony, terror of the Outer Rim, was surrendering to a single human ship. Marcus Chen's voice came through the communication system, calm and professional, as if he had just finished a routine patrol rather than single-handedly destroying an entire fleet. Unknown vessel. This is Commander Chun of the Terran ship Phantom Strike. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. We comply, came the response, transmitted in the harsh, guttural language of the hegemony's ruling caste. We wish to negotiate terms of survival. There are no negotiations, Marcus replied, and his voice carried an edge of steel that made Zara shiver. You are war criminals who have murdered billions of innocent beings. You will be taken into custody and held for trial. The hegemony ship, Zara could now see it was of Vorthan design. All sharp angles and aggressive protrusions, seemed to consider this for several moments. Then, apparently deciding that surrender was preferable to dissolution, it powered down its weapons and waited. Small craft began emerging from the Phantom Strike, moving toward the captured vessel with the same fluid grace as their parent ship. But Zara's attention was drawn by another shuttle heading toward the gentle current. Marcus Chun was returning, probably to check on their condition and arrange for their promised escort to safety. When a human commander arrived back on the Villani ship, he looked exactly as calm and composed as when he had left. There was no sign of battle stress, no indication that he had just accomplished what many would consider impossible. He simply smiled and asked, "Is everyone all right? I know that display might have been a bit intense." A bit intense. Zara felt that inappropriate laugh threatening to escape again. She had just watched a single alien ship destroy an entire fleet using weapons that shouldn't exist, and he was worried about whether the show had been too dramatic. "Commander," she managed to say, "how is what we just witnessed even possible? Those weapons, that defense system, your technology is beyond anything in galactic civilization." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose it would seem that way. Humans have had some advantages in our technological development. We've had to learn to think outside conventional paradigms. But the molecular dissolution weapons, the spatial barriers, the way your ship moves..." Engineer Kess stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his caution. These technologies require an understanding of fundamental forces that most species are centuries away from achieving. True, Marcus agreed. But you're assuming linear technological progression. Humans learned early that sometimes you have to skip steps, find new approaches when conventional methods fail. He paused, considering his words. When your species is faced with extinction, you learn to be creative very quickly. Extinction. The word hung in the air like a ghost. Zara thought of her own people, scattered and hunted, their colonies destroyed, and their homeworld silent. Commander, you said the hegemony would be stopped. Did you mean just this fleet, or? I meant all of it. Marcus replied with quiet conviction. The murder, the genocide, the conquest of peaceful worlds. All of it ends now. This fleet was just the beginning. Through the viewport, Zara could see human boarding shuttles docked with the captured hegemony vessel. The process looked routine, professional, as if the humans had done this many times before, which she was beginning to suspect they probably had. How many ships like yours exist? She asked. Marcus smiled, but didn't answer directly. Enough. Captain, we need to discuss your situation. You said your homeworld has gone silent, your colonies destroyed. Where would you like us to take you? It was a fair question, but Zara had no answer. With their civilization in ruins, where could they go? Other species might offer temporary refuge, but the Villani would be refugees dependent on alien charity and always at risk of being asked to leave. Their culture, their way of life, would slowly fade away until they became just another extinct species in the galaxy's long history. I don't know, she admitted. Our people are scattered. Our worlds are gone. Perhaps Haven Station, as you suggested. It's neutral territory, and they might accept refugees. That's one option, Marcus agreed. But there's another possibility. What if your homeworld isn't really lost? Zara blinked, her large eyes widening. The communications have been silent for 3 days. The hegemony fleet that attacked the outer colonies was heading directly for Velan Prime. By now, they might have encountered something they weren't expecting. Marcus interrupted gently. Captain, humans have been active in this sector for several months. We've been watching the hegemony's expansion, gathering intelligence, preparing responses. When we learned they were targeting Velan Prime, we took steps. What kind of steps? Marcus touched his wrist communicator again. Strike Command, this is Chun. Status on Operation Garden Shield. The response came immediately, transmitted clearly enough for everyone on the bridge to hear. Garden Shield is complete, Commander. Velan Prime is secure. Hegemony forces neutralized. Civilian casualties minimal. Zara felt her legs give way, and Security Chief Yon caught her arm to keep her from falling. Velan Prime was safe. Her homeworld, with its crystal cities and floating gardens, its libraries and schools and millions of peaceful inhabitants, still existed. The communications silence hadn't been because the planet was destroyed, but because we had to isolate the system temporarily, Marcus explained, seeing her confusion. It's a defensive measure, cutting off all electromagnetic signals in and out of the target area. Prevents the enemy from calling for reinforcements or sending intelligence back to their commanders. But our people, they must think the worst. The silence, the lack of communication, is temporary. The isolation field will be lifted as soon as we're certain the threat has been eliminated completely. Marcus's expression grew more serious. Captain, what I'm about to tell you must remain confidential until we've finished our operations. Can I trust your discretion? Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. The hegemony is finished. They don't know it yet, but their military capacity has been neutralized across 17 sectors. Their leadership is being systematically eliminated, their fleets destroyed or captured. Within the next 72 hours, the threat they represent will be completely eliminated. 17 sectors. The scale of what Marcus was describing was staggering. The hegemony controlled hundreds of systems, had millions of personnel, possessed enough firepower to threaten entire galactic arms. But the humans spoke of dismantling them as if it were a routine police action. How many of your ships are involved in this operation? Engineer Kess asked. That's classified, Marcus replied, but his slight smile suggested the number would be surprising. What I can tell you is that humanity has decided to take a more active role in galactic affairs. We've been watching from the sidelines too long while aggressive species prey on peaceful ones. But why? Zara asked. Why risk your own people for strangers? Most species look after their own interests first. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested personal experience with the subject. Captain, humans learned long ago what happens when good people do nothing while evil spreads. We've seen civilizations fall because no one was willing to stand up to tyrants. We've made mistakes, been too slow to act, watched innocents die while we debated and hesitated. He looked out at the stars, his expression distant. We swore we wouldn't make those mistakes again. When we see species like yours, peaceful, cultured, undeserving of destruction, we act. Because someone has to. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Outside, the human boarding shuttles were completing their work, securing the captured hegemony vessel and its crew. Soon, those responsible for the destruction of countless worlds would face justice. It felt almost like a dream. Commander, Zara said slowly, what happens next? After the hegemony is gone, after the immediate threat is eliminated? That's up to you, Marcus replied. Humanity isn't interested in conquest or control. We just want to make sure species like yours can exist in peace, develop your own cultures, find your own paths among the stars. He smiled. Think of us as guardians. We'll be watching, but from a distance. Guardians. The word resonated with something deep in Villani culture. Ancient myths of spirits that protected the innocent and punished the wicked. For the first time since the crisis began, Zara felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Will we see you again? She asked. Marcus nodded toward the massive human ship hanging in space nearby. Whenever you need help, Captain. That's a promise. Humans don't abandon their friends. As if summoned by his words, the Phantom Strike began to shimmer, its hull taking on the same rippling quality as the space around it. The great vessel was preparing to depart, probably to continue its mission of dismantling the hegemony's remaining forces. But first they had a promise to keep. The journey to Velan Prime would take only hours through the human-generated subspace tunnel. Soon, Zara would be home, her people safe, their civilization intact. The nightmare was over. As the human ship began to fade from normal space, Marcus made his way back to his shuttle. But he paused at the airlock, turning back to face the Villani crew. Captain, there's one more thing. When you get home, when you're reunited with your people, remember this day. Remember that even in the darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places. And remember that the galaxy is vast and full of wonders. Humanity is just one of them. Then he was gone, and the gentle current was alone again with the stars. But it no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like a blessing. 3 months after the destruction of the hegemony fleet, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session on neutral Centauri Prime. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sounds that the universal translators worked overtime to process. But today, for the first time in the Council's 1,000-year history, every delegate was discussing the same topic, the humans. Ambassador Krell of the Centauri, a tall, crystalline being whose body refracted light in complex patterns when he was agitated, called the session to order with considerable effort. The excitement in the chamber was palpable, crackling through the air like static electricity. Honored delegates, Krell began, his voice carrying the harmonious undertones that made Centauri speech so pleasant to most species. We gather today to address the recent developments in the Outer Rim territories. As you all know, the hegemony threat has been completely neutralized by unknown forces claiming to represent something called humanity. A ripple of movement went through the assembly as delegates adjusted their positions, extended sensory organs, or simply vibrated with anticipation. The Kratari representative, General Voss, stood with barely contained aggression. His species had lost the most in the hegemony's destruction, as they had been the dominant military force within the Alliance. Unknown forces? Voss snarled, his mandibles clicking with irritation. We know exactly what happened. A single ship, using impossible technology, systematically dismantled our entire defensive network. This humanity has declared war on sovereign galactic powers without provocation. Without provocation? The melodic voice belonged to Captain Zura, who had been invited to give testimony about her encounter with the humans. She had arrived 2 days ago, and her presence had caused quite a stir among the delegates. Survivors of hegemony attacks were rare, and her story had already begun circulating through diplomatic channels. General Voss, perhaps you have forgotten the millions of civilians your hegemony murdered? The peaceful colonies reduced to ash? The children who died screaming as your planet crackers tore their worlds apart? Voss's compound eyes fixed on the Volani captain with predatory focus. The hegemony brought order to chaos, strength to weakness. Those who could not defend themselves had no right to exist. The statement sent shockwaves through the assembly. Several delegates rose to protest, their various forms of outrage creating a cacophony that required Ambassador Krell to activate sonic dampeners to restore order. General Voss, Krell said carefully, your statement is noted for the record. However, the Council must focus on the immediate situation. We have confirmed reports of hegemony forces being eliminated across 17 sectors. Fortress worlds that should have been impregnable were breached without resistance. Command ships that carried the finest military minds in known space simply disappeared. Not disappeared, corrected Dr. Yemera, the Andromedan delegate whose species was renowned for their analytical capabilities. Captured. Our intelligence networks have confirmed that thousands of hegemony personnel are being held in detention facilities on planets that didn't exist last month. These humans have somehow constructed entire prison worlds in a matter of weeks. This revelation caused another stir in the assembly. The logistics of constructing planetary installations in such a short time frame was beyond the capabilities of any known civilization. Even with the most advanced automated construction systems, building habitable worlds required years of preparation and massive resource investments. Furthermore, Dr. Yemera continued, our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive gravitational anomalies consistent with artificial stellar engineering. The humans appear to be constructing something in the Void Reach, far beyond the edge of known space. The Void Reach was a region of empty space between galactic arms, devoid of stars or habitable planets. It was considered worthless territory, useful only as a navigation reference point. The idea that anyone would build installations there was baffling. What could they possibly want with empty space? Asked Counselor Finn of the Aquatic Worlds, her voice bubbling through the water-filled sphere that allowed her to participate in surface-dweller politics. Perhaps, said a new voice, they value privacy. Every delegate in the chamber turned toward the source of the voice, and several gasped in surprise. Standing at the entrance to the amphitheater was a human, the first any of them had seen in person. He was tall and lean, with dark skin and silver hair that suggested considerable age by human standards. His clothing was simple but elegant, appearing to be made of some material that shifted color slightly as he moved. Most remarkably, he had apparently entered the most secure facility on Zentari Prime without triggering a single security alert. I am Ambassador David Park, the human said, walking calmly toward the center of the chamber. I represent the Terran Federation in these proceedings. Security, General Voss roared, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The council chamber was supposed to be weapon-free, but the Kratari general clearly felt that rule no longer applied. General, please, Ambassador Park said mildly. Violence in a diplomatic setting is so uncivilized. Something in his tone made Voss freeze in place. Some subtle threat that transcended species barriers. I'm here to answer your questions about recent events. Ambassador Krell recovered his composure first. Ambassador Park, welcome to the Galactic Council. However, your presence here raises immediate concerns. How did you bypass our security systems? This facility is supposed to be impenetrable. David Park smiled, and something about the expression reminded Zara of Commander Chen's predatory grin before the battle. Ambassador Krell, if humans wanted to harm anyone in this room, you would never have seen us coming. We're here to talk, not to threaten. Then, explain yourselves. Voss demanded. You destroyed an entire galactic power without warning, without negotiation, without even announcing your presence to the Council. We announced our presence to the people who mattered, Park replied calmly. The victims of hegemony aggression, the civilian populations being slaughtered by your forces. Their voices were the only ones that counted. Dr. Yemera's analytical mind focused on practical questions. Ambassador, our estimates suggest that your actions required a military force of impossible scale. Even the most conservative calculations indicate you would need thousands of ships with capabilities far beyond anything in our database. Doctor, you're thinking in terms of conventional warfare. Humans learned long ago that fighting fair is for sports, not survival. What does that mean? Krell asked. Park gestured to the air above the assembly, and suddenly a three-dimensional hologram appeared, showing a detailed star chart of the local galactic region. The display was far more advanced than anything the Council's own systems could produce, showing not just star positions, but real-time tactical information spanning dozens of sectors. For the past 50 years, Park explained, humanity has been observing galactic civilization from a safe distance. We watched your various conflicts, studied your technologies, learned your languages and customs. We prepared. The star chart shifted, highlighting systems that glowed with different colors. Red markers appeared throughout hegemony space, while green indicators showed Volani territory, other peaceful systems, and neutral zones. When we identified the threat the hegemony represented, we didn't rush to confront them directly. We prepared specific countermeasures for every ship class, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine they employed. By the time we acted, the outcome was never in doubt. You're saying you studied us like laboratory specimens, General Voss accused. We studied you like a potential threat, Park corrected. Your species has a long history of aggression, General. The hegemony wasn't your first attempt at galactic conquest, merely your most recent. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Other delegates began examining their data files, many for the first time looking at Kratari history from an outside perspective. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Cycles of expansion, conquest, and eventual collapse, with billions of casualties each time. What do you want from us? Counselor Finn asked. What are humanity's demands? We have no demands, Park replied simply. We want nothing from any of you except to be left alone to pursue our own development in peace. But you've taken prisoners, Dr. Yemmer pointed out. Thousands of hegemony personnel are being held on your prison worlds. War criminals, Park clarified. They will be tried for their crimes against galactic civilization, judged by the laws of the species they wronged, and punished accordingly. Justice, not vengeance. The implications of this statement sent another wave of nervous energy through the chamber. If humans were willing to try hegemony personnel for war crimes, what did that mean for other species with questionable histories? How far back would human justice reach? Ambassador, Zara spoke for the first time since Park's arrival. Commander Chin told me that humanity has been watching galactic affairs for decades. If you had the power to stop atrocities like the ones committed by the hegemony, why didn't you act sooner? Park's expression grew somber. Captain Zara, that's perhaps the most important question anyone has asked today. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Humanity has made terrible mistakes in our past. We've acted too quickly, imposed our will on others, tried to solve problems through force when patience would have been wiser. We learned that intervention, no matter how well-intentioned, can cause more harm than good. The star chart changed again, showing historical data spanning centuries. Species rise and fall, borders shift, conflicts flare and die. But now there were subtle indicators showing human observation posts, monitoring stations hidden throughout the galaxy. We've been watching, learning, waiting for clear moral imperatives. The hegemony crossed every possible line. They weren't fighting for resources or territory or even ideology. They were committing genocide for its own sake, destroying entire cultures because they enjoyed the process. And now? Ambassador Krell asked. What happens next? Now, things return to normal, Park said. Trade, diplomacy, exploration, cultural exchange. The things that make galactic civilization worthwhile. The only difference is that certain behaviors will no longer be tolerated. You're appointing yourselves as galactic police? Voss demanded. We're accepting the responsibility that comes with power, Park corrected. A responsibility that this council has consistently avoided. The accusation stung because it was true. The Galactic Council had spent centuries debating responses to various crises while billions died. They prioritized diplomatic procedure over decisive action, consensus over justice. In many ways, their inaction had enabled atrocities like those committed by the hegemony. What specific behaviors will be not tolerated? Dr. Yemera asked carefully. Park's answer was simple and terrifying in its implications. genocide, slavery, the deliberate targeting of civilians, the destruction of peaceful worlds, anything that threatens the fundamental right of sentient beings to exist in peace. And if a species violates these standards, then they will discover what happened to the hegemony. The chamber fell silent. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Humanity had demonstrated the power to eliminate entire galactic civilizations with apparent ease. Now they were announcing their intention to use that power as a tool of galactic law enforcement. You can't simply impose your moral standards on the entire galaxy, Counselor Finn protested. Different species have different values, different approaches to conflict resolution. Different approaches to conflict resolution, yes, Park agreed. Different standards regarding the fundamental right to exist, no. That's not a cultural preference, Counselor. It's a basic requirement for civilization. Ambassador Krell raised a crystalline hand. Ambassador Park, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask, what assurance do we have that humanity will not become the very thing you claim to oppose? Power corrupts, as they say. How do we know you won't use your superior technology to impose your will on peaceful species? Park smiled, and this time the expression was genuinely warm. Ambassador Krell, that's exactly the right question to ask. The answer is simple. Watch us. Observe our actions, not our words. If we ever become the thing we've sworn to prevent, then you'll know it's time to find a way to stop us. And if we can't stop you, then you'll have learned something valuable about the nature of power and responsibility. But I don't think it will come to that. Humans learned a long time ago that the greatest strength comes from restraint, not from the willingness to use force. Dr. Yemera's analytical mind seized on a practical detail. Ambassador, you mentioned that humanity has been developing in isolation for decades. Where? Our surveys show no human colonies in known space. That's correct, Park acknowledged. Human space is located outside the galactic disk in what you call the void reach. We've been building our civilization in the space between galaxies, where we could develop without interference or accidentally threatening existing civilizations. The scale of what he was describing was staggering. To build an entire civilization in intergalactic space would require technology so advanced that it bordered on the godlike. It would mean creating artificial stars, constructing habitable worlds from raw matter, mastering forces that most species could barely measure, let alone control. How many humans exist? Krell asked. Classified, Park replied pleasantly. But I will say this, enough. Enough to guarantee that what happened to the hegemony could be repeated as many times as necessary. General Voss stood abruptly, his massive form trembling with rage. You're threatening the entire galaxy. This is tyranny disguised as justice. General, Park said calmly, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining the new reality. Galactic civilization has a guardian now, whether it wants one or not. Those who live in peace have nothing to fear. Those who prey on the innocent. He shrugged. Well, they should probably find new hobbies. And what about our sovereignty? Another delegate demanded. Our right to govern ourselves? Completely intact, Park assured them. Humanity has no interest in ruling other species or interfering in your internal affairs. You can govern yourselves however you choose, follow whatever social systems work for your people, pursue whatever goals drive your civilization. The only restriction is that your choices cannot involve the destruction of others. Captain Zara found herself speaking again. Ambassador, may I ask a personal question? Of course, Captain. Commander Chun saved my people, my ship, my life. But he could have simply destroyed the hegemony fleet and left us to die from our reactor failure. Instead, he took time to repair our systems, escort us to safety, ensure our well-being. Why? What did humanity gain from saving a small cargo vessel? Park's expression grew thoughtful. Captain, that question goes to the heart of what makes us human. Commander Chin saved you because it was the right thing to do. No other reason was necessary. But the time, the resources, the risk were irrelevant, Park finished. Humanity learned something fundamental about ourselves during our early development. We are at our best when we're protecting others, at our worst when we think only of ourselves. Helping you wasn't a burden or a calculated political move. It was who we choose to be. The assembly digested this in silence. Most galactic civilizations operated on principles of rational self-interest, careful cost-benefit analysis, and strategic advantage. The idea of a species that would risk themselves for strangers purely because it was morally correct was almost incomprehensible. What happens now? Ambassador Krell asked finally. How does the Council proceed with this new reality? However you choose, Park replied. The Council can continue its work of facilitating diplomacy and trade between civilizations. That's valuable work, important work. The only difference is that certain extreme solutions to political problems are no longer available. Will humanity join the Council? Dr. Yemra asked. No, Park said immediately. We prefer to remain observers. Our membership would inevitably compromise the Council's independence and create pressure for other species to defer to our positions. That's not healthy for galactic democracy. But you'll continue to monitor our activities? We'll continue to watch for threats to galactic peace. That's not the same thing as monitoring your activities. General Voss made one last attempt at defiance. And if we refuse to accept this arrangement, if we demand that humanity withdraw from galactic affairs, Park's smile returned, and suddenly, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. General, you're certainly free to make that demand. I'm sure it will receive all the consideration it deserves. The threat was polite, diplomatic, and absolutely terrifying. Voss sat down heavily, apparently realizing that his species' traditional approach to problem-solving was no longer viable. Are there any other questions? Park asked. Ambassador Krell looked around the chamber, noting the stunned expressions on most delegates' faces. I think, Ambassador Park, that we will need time to process this information and discuss it among ourselves. Of course, take all the time you need. Park handed Krell a small device that seemed to be made of crystallized light. If the Council needs to communicate with humanity for any reason, use this. We'll respond as quickly as possible. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing. Within the next few days, you'll be receiving reports about massive construction projects in various systems. Don't be alarmed. We're building refugee centers for the survivors of hegemony attacks, medical facilities for the wounded, and temporary housing for those who lost their homes. Think of it as humanitarian aid on a galactic scale. With that, he walked calmly out of the chamber, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. 6 months after the Galactic Council meeting, Captain Zara stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of species dock with the massive facility. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a joint construction project that had somehow been completed in mere weeks rather than the decades such undertakings normally required. But then, humanity had been full of surprises since their dramatic entrance onto the galactic stage. The station hung in orbit around Velan Prime, serving as both a symbol of the planet's recovery and a practical hub for the refugee resettlement efforts that had become humanity's latest project. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Zara could see her homeworld slowly healing from the scars left by the hegemony's attempted invasion. New cities were rising from the ruins of the old, their crystal spires reaching toward the stars with a beauty that surpassed even the original architecture. Captain Zara, a familiar voice spoke behind her. She turned to see Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the human coordinator who had been overseeing the refugee operations. Dr. Mitchell was smaller than the other humans Zara had met, with brown hair streaked with silver and kind eyes behind thin optical enhancement devices. But, like all humans, she carried herself with that subtle confidence that spoke of hidden depths. Dr. Mitchell, Zara replied, offering the traditional Volani greeting of extended hands. How are the new arrivals settling in? Better than expected, Sarah replied, returning the gesture with the careful precision that showed she had taken time to learn Volani customs. The Andorian refugees from Sector 7 have adapted remarkably well to the artificial atmosphere systems. And the Centauri children seem to love the low-gravity recreation areas. Zara nodded, still amazed by the sheer scale of what humanity had accomplished. In the months following the hegemony's destruction, human ships had appeared throughout the former war zones, carrying not weapons, but supplies, medical equipment, and prefabricated habitat modules. Entire refugee cities had been constructed overnight, complete with hospitals, schools, and cultural centers designed to meet the specific needs of dozens of different species. May I ask you something, Dr. Mitchell? Of course. The resources being expended on these relief efforts, the materials, the manpower, the technology. By our calculations, humanity is spending more on refugee aid than most civilizations spend on their entire military budgets. And you're doing it for strangers, people you owe nothing to. Why? Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out at the bustling traffic around the station. Captain, have you ever heard the phrase, never again? I'm not familiar with it. It's something humans say when we witness atrocities. It means that we will not allow such things to happen again if we have the power to prevent them. Sarah's expression grew distant. Humanity has a complicated history with genocide, Captain. We've been both victims and perpetrators. We know what it's like to lose everything, and we know what it's like to be the ones causing that loss. The casual admission sent a chill through Zara. She had suspected that humans had a violent past, given their obvious military capabilities, but the idea that they had committed genocide themselves was disturbing. We learn from our mistakes, Sarah continued. The hard way, through centuries of war and suffering and self-reflection. We swore that if we ever had the power to prevent others from experiencing what we had experienced, we would use that power. The alternative is to become complicit in atrocities through our inaction. But the cost is irrelevant, Sarah finished. Captain, what's the point of having power if you don't use it to protect the innocent? What's the purpose of advanced technology if it doesn't improve lives? Humanity could have remained hidden in our corner of space, safe and isolated, but that would have made us cowards. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Sarah touched a device on her wrist, listening to words that Zara couldn't quite hear. Her expression grew serious. Captain, would you be willing to accompany me to a meeting? There's something you should see, something that will help answer your questions about humanity's motivations. Intrigued, Zara followed Dr. Mitchell through the station's corridors. The design was unmistakably human, but accommodated the needs of dozens of species. Corridors were sized for beings ranging from the tiny Pixari to the massive Centaurans. Atmospheric controls maintained optimal conditions for various respiratory systems. Gravitational fields could be adjusted locally to accommodate species evolved under different planetary conditions. They arrived at a conference room where several other beings were already assembled. Zara recognized some of them. Admiral Korvac, the Villani military commander who had miraculously survived the Battle of Kepler Nexus. Dr. Chinare, an Andromedan xenobiologist who had become something of a celebrity for her work documenting war crimes. And General Harrison, one of the few humans in the group. But it was the figure at the head of the table who commanded attention. Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez was clearly a senior human military officer, her uniform bearing insignia that Zara didn't recognize, but which seemed to command immediate respect from everyone present. She was middle-aged by human standards, with steel-gray hair and eyes that held the weight of command decisions that could affect entire civilizations. Captain Zara, Admiral Vasquez said, rising as they entered. Thank you for joining us. Please take a seat. We have something important to discuss. As they settled around the table, a holographic display activated in the center, showing a star chart that encompassed nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Red markers indicated former hegemony territories, while green showed areas that had been liberated. But what caught Zara's attention were the yellow indicators scattered throughout various sectors. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications, Admiral Vasquez began, what you're looking at is the current threat assessment for this galactic region. The red zones are fully secure. The green zones are stable, but the yellow markers represent new concerns. Dr. Chinare leaned forward, her large dark eyes reflecting the hologram's light. Admiral, these yellow markers, they appear to be in sectors that were previously considered peaceful. Correct. In the 6 months since the hegemony's elimination, we've observed disturbing patterns of behavior from several previously neutral powers. The outer hegemony's collapse created a power vacuum, and various species are moving to fill it. The display zoomed in on one of the yellow markers, revealing detailed intelligence about a region controlled by the Corvin Empire. Military buildups, aggressive expansion into former hegemony space, and, most disturbingly, reports of civilian populations being forcibly relocated. The Corvins have always been militaristic, Admiral Korvac observed, but they maintained a rough balance with their neighbors. Are you saying they're becoming actively expansionist? More than that, General Harrison replied. Intelligence suggests they're implementing what they call population optimization protocols in conquered territories. Forced labor, genetic screening, elimination of undesirable populations. The room fell silent. Population optimization was a euphemism that every species recognized, even if they preferred not to think about what it actually meant. There are also concerning developments in the Tau sector, Admiral Vasquez continued. The corporate consortium has begun aggressive acquisition policies, essentially buying entire star systems and then stripping them of resources with no regard for indigenous populations. And here, she indicated another marker. The Vorthan Confederacy is conducting what they call scientific experiments on captured prisoners. The nature of these experiments violates every ethical standard recognized by galactic civilization. Captain Zara felt a familiar cold dread settling in her stomach. Admiral, are you saying that destroying the hegemony simply made room for new threats to emerge? That's exactly what I'm saying, Captain. And it raises a fundamental question about humanity's role in galactic affairs. Admiral Vasquez deactivated the hologram and looked around the table. We eliminated one threat, but doing so created conditions for new ones to arise. How do we address this without becoming the galactic dictators we never wanted to be? Dr. Chinare spoke carefully. Admiral, what options are you considering? Several. We could launch preemptive strikes against these emerging threats, eliminate them before they become as dangerous as the hegemony. We could establish permanent human military presence in key sectors to deter aggression. We could work through the Galactic Council to implement new treaties and enforcement mechanisms. Or, General Harrison prompted, or we could take a more active role in galactic governance, not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians. Establish clear standards of behavior and enforce them consistently. The implications were staggering. What Admiral Vasquez was describing was essentially a human protectorate over galactic civilization. It would mean the end of true independence for most species, even if that control was exercised benevolently. Admiral, Zara said carefully, what you're describing sounds dangerously close to the very imperialism that humanity claims to oppose. I agree, Vasquez replied, which is why I've asked you all here. Each of you represents a different perspective on this problem. Captain Zara, you've seen both the best and worst of what happens when powerful civilizations clash. Admiral Korvac, you understand military strategy and the balance of power. Dr. Chinare, you've documented the costs of inaction in the face of atrocities. General Harrison represents humanity's military perspective. She paused, looking each of them in the eye. I need your honest assessment. What should humanity do? Admiral Korvac spoke first. From a purely military perspective, the preemptive option makes sense. Eliminate threats before they fully develop. But militarily logical doesn't mean morally right. The preemptive approach would make us no better than those we claim to oppose, Dr. Chinare added. How do we justify attacking species that haven't yet committed atrocities, even if we believe they will? But if we wait until they do commit atrocities, General Harrison pointed out, millions more innocent beings will die. How do we justify allowing that when we have the power to prevent it? Captain Zara found herself thinking of Commander Chun, of his certainty that doing the right thing was always more important than following established procedures. Admiral, may I ask what Commander Chun would recommend? Admiral Vasquez smiled slightly. Marcus suggested I should ask exactly that question. His answer was typically human. We should do whatever saves the most innocent lives, regardless of the political consequences. Simple to say, difficult to implement, Dr. Chinare observed. Indeed. Which brings me to why you're all here. Admiral Vasquez touched a control, and the holographic display reactivated, but this time it showed a different image entirely. Instead of threat assessments and military deployments, it displayed what appeared to be a massive construction project in deep space. This is Project Lighthouse, she explained. It's humanity's proposed solution to the guardianship problem. The structure in the hologram was enormous, dwarfing even the largest space stations ever conceived. It appeared to be part fortress, part research facility, and part diplomatic center with sections designed to accommodate every known species in the galaxy. Lighthouse would serve as a neutral base of operations for galactic peacekeeping, not controlled by any single species, but staffed by volunteers from across galactic civilization. Its mission would be to monitor developing situations, provide early warning of potential conflicts, and coordinate rapid response to humanitarian crises. Staffed by volunteers? Admiral Korvac asked skeptically. Admiral, with respect, most species are reluctant to risk their people for others' conflicts, which is why the volunteers would be primarily human, General Harrison explained. We provide the military capability, the advanced technology, and most of the personnel. Other species would contribute intelligence, diplomatic expertise, and cultural knowledge. Dr. Chinare studied the display intently. This is essentially a way of formalizing humanity's role as galactic protector while maintaining the fiction of multilateral cooperation. It's more than fiction, Admiral Vasquez insisted. The decision-making process would be truly collaborative. Humans would provide capability, but we wouldn't make unilateral decisions about intervention. Who would make those decisions? Zara asked. A council composed of representatives from every major galactic civilization, with rotating leadership and consensus-based protocols. Think of it as the Galactic Council with actual authority and the power to enforce its decisions. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the proposal. It was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted in galactic history, requiring levels of cooperation and trust that had never existed between species. The alternative, Admiral Vasquez said quietly, is for humanity to act unilaterally whenever we detect threats. And I'll be honest with all of you, that's a path that leads inevitably to human dominance over galactic civilization. We don't want that responsibility, but we won't abandon innocent beings to preserve political niceties. Captain Zara thought of her people, of the terror they had felt when the hegemony fleet appeared in their space, of the impossible relief when the Phantom Strike emerged from the darkness like an avenging angel. Admiral, if Project Lighthouse had existed when the hegemony was expanding, would it have prevented the destruction of our colonies? That's the goal, Captain. Early detection, rapid response, overwhelming force applied precisely where needed. The hegemony was allowed to grow dangerous because no one wanted to take responsibility for stopping them before they became unstoppable. And if the Council of Species makes the wrong decision, if they choose not to act when action is needed, Admiral Vasquez's expression grew grim. Then humanity will act anyway. We won't allow political paralysis to enable genocide. But at least this way, other species will have a voice in the process. Dr. Chinare raised a practical concern. Admiral, the construction requirements for this project. Where would humanity obtain the resources? The material and energy costs would be astronomical. Doctor, have you ever wondered where humanity gets its resources now? The refugee stations, the medical facilities, the construction projects we've been completing throughout the galaxy. I assumed you had vast industrial capabilities. We do, but not in the way you're thinking. Admiral Vasquez touched another control, and the display shifted to show something that made everyone in the room gasp. It was a star, but not a natural star. This was clearly artificial, a fusion reactor of impossible scale, suspended in space, and surrounded by massive collection arrays that fed energy directly into nearby construction facilities. Humanity doesn't mine asteroids or strip mine planets for resources, the Admiral explained. We build stars, custom-designed fusion reactors that provide unlimited clean energy, which we then use to convert basic matter into whatever we need. The technology she was describing was so far beyond anything in galactic civilization that it bordered on the incomprehensible. Building artificial stars wasn't just advanced engineering. It was the manipulation of fundamental forces that most species couldn't even measure accurately. How many of these artificial stars exist? Admiral Korvac asked, his military mind grasping the strategic implications. Classified, General Harrison replied, but enough to power any conceivable construction project. Captain Zara felt a laugh building in her throat, though whether from amazement or hysteria, she couldn't tell. Admiral, humanity could literally rebuild galactic civilization from scratch if necessary. Couldn't you? If necessary, Admiral Vasquez confirmed. But we'd rather not have to. Hence Project Lighthouse. The meeting continued for several more hours, covering logistics, political implications, and practical concerns. But by the end, everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed a turning point in galactic history. Humanity wasn't asking for permission to become galactic guardians. They were offering other species a chance to participate in decisions that would be made regardless. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to leave, Admiral Vasquez approached Captain Zara privately. "Captain, I have a personal question for you." "Of course, Admiral. If Project Lighthouse moves forward, would you consider serving as the Volani representative on the Governing Council? Your experience with both the hegemony's brutality and humanity's intervention gives you a unique perspective that we'll need." Zara considered the offer. It would mean leaving her ship, her comfortable life as a cargo captain, to take on responsibilities that could affect the future of galactic civilization. It would mean becoming part of something unprecedented in galactic history. But she thought of Commander Chin's words about doing what was right rather than what was easy, and her answer came without hesitation. "Admiral, it would be an honor." 2 years after the establishment of Project Lighthouse, Captain Zura, now Counselor Zura of the Galactic Peacekeeping Authority, stood in the observation lounge of the massive station and watched history unfold before her eyes. The lighthouse hung in the gravitational balance point between 3 star systems, its impressive bulk serving as both headquarters and symbol of the new order that had emerged in galactic politics. The station itself was a marvel that still took her breath away, even after months of living aboard it. 7 kilometers long and nearly 3 kilometers in diameter at its widest point, Lighthouse combined the architectural sensibilities of dozens of species into a harmonious whole that somehow managed to feel both alien and familiar to everyone who lived there. Human engineering provided the underlying structure and technological systems, but the living spaces, cultural centers, and work areas reflected the diverse needs of the 47 species that now called the station home. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, Zara could see the current crisis unfolding in real time. The Corvin Empire, one of the threats Admiral Vasquez had identified 2 years earlier, had finally overplayed their hand. Their fleet of 200 ships hung motionless in space, surrounded by what appeared to be empty void, but which sensors revealed to be filled with human vessels operating in full stealth mode. "Counselor Zura," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Dr. Tlara, the Andorian representative whose analytical mind had made her invaluable in strategic planning. "The emergency council session is about to begin." Zara nodded, taking one last look at the frozen tableau outside. The Corvin fleet had been intercepted while en route to pacify the Meridian colonies, a peaceful cluster of systems whose only crime had been their refusal to submit to Corvin sovereignty. Intelligence reports indicated that the Corvins planned to implement their population optimization protocols on a scale that would have resulted in the deaths of over 1 billion innocent beings. The council chamber was already filled when they arrived. Representatives from dozens of species sat around the circular table that had become the symbol of collaborative galactic governance. At the center of the table, a holographic display showed tactical information about the current situation, updating in real time as events unfolded. Fleet Admiral Vasquez, now serving as the military coordinator for the Peacekeeping Authority, stood to address the assembly. "Counselors, the situation is as follows. The Corvin fleet was intercepted 14 hours ago as they approached the Meridian system. They've been offered terms for withdrawal and have refused. Under Article 7 of the Lighthouse Accords, we are now authorized to use necessary force to protect civilian populations." Counselor Vector of the Centauran systems raised a concern. "Admiral, the Corvin Empire has legitimate grievances against the Meridian colonies. There are outstanding trade disputes, territorial claims that date back centuries." "Counselor," interrupted Dr. Chinare, who now served as the authority's senior investigator for war crimes, "our intelligence indicates that the Corvins have already begun construction of extermination facilities on occupied worlds. Whatever their historical grievances, they do not justify genocide." The debate that followed was familiar to Zara, though no less important for its predictability. The delicate balance between respecting species sovereignty and Protecting innocent lives required constant calibration, and every crisis tested the principles that held the peacekeeping authority together. The vote, announced Chancellor Krelmos, the rotating leader of the Council, is on Resolution 847. Authorization for immediate military intervention to protect the Meridian colonies from Corvan aggression. All in favor. The result was overwhelming. 37 votes in favor, 6 against, 4 abstentions. It was more decisive than many previous votes, but Zara noted with concern that opposition was growing among some species who viewed the authority as an infringement on traditional sovereignty. Admiral Vasquez, Chancellor Krelmos, said formally, "You are hereby authorized to take whatever action is necessary to protect civilian populations in the Mary."